let's look at and talk about what I've come to looking at the mission. Um, don't know how well I'm gonna hold up with shit, but let's start off with components because things open up. Hey, there's a lot of wrinkling. This was put together really kind of poorly. I assume just hand pasted, whatever. It's White Dog Games. I think they use Blue Panther to produce their games, but you know, I mean, I got stuff like this. It won't stay stuck. So the box comes out losing some grade on that. The map is kind of nice. I like the pale tones on it. Sometimes the paths are difficult to distinguish on it once there's a lot of pieces in play. But I think overall the map does its job fairly well, to tell you the truth. The player aids, this is exceedingly helpful. Oh, neat, I didn't notice this. We got just historical notes on all the different factions. Well, I wouldn't call them factions, but major branches in Christianity that are represented as different titles, as well as the heresies. Neat. I didn't see that when I was looking because I was so intent on using this for what it's used for. You have, this is your sequence of play. I noticed this is problematic. For one thing, the distinguishment between what are just historical notes and what are game elements is not always absolutely clear. So for example, the Turks down here, this is probably the worst case, have this little tiny green thing. Basically, if there's a symbol next to it, it is a game effect. But you know, it's plugged in after all of these elements. It ends up kind of difficult. Now, of course, I had my own difficulty with it and ran through into a different phase change, which is clear as day, you know, different color scheme, etc. I got no excuse, and I'm someone who has an easy time having problems. But this is a pretty necessary piece because it does convey a lot of information. I wish that a lighter, that rather than just use italics, which ends up being used here, so Third Council of Constantinople is in italics, but so is things like Rise of Islam, which you could almost argue, but Armenian Persia fall, pretty much all this historical stuff is written in the same typeface, which I think a paler color, different typefacing, whatever, would have been more useful to me, perhaps, in terms of seeing things. The only thing I could really see well were the great theologians, who have a counter that you're supposed to transfer from here to this sheet, where it's really kind of out of the way. What's up with this sheet? Well, much of this sheet, the top almost half, is the counter tray. It's basically where you set up all the pieces before you set up the game. And a lot of those pieces end up on the board or in cups or something like that, and you really don't need the counter tray for them. The others that are there, you need seldom, so you end up kind of putting this aside and not noticing that you threw your great theologian on here. Now, you could do this differently, and I certainly learned a little bit more, you know, how to cope with it, but right away it created a little difficulty for me to remember that I had a theologian on the board anymore after I moved him from here. I'd probably have been better off leaving him on the turn record track, to tell you the truth, and then I'd look him up. or put them on the actual game board. And then you also have a single table here, which is of some importance, and I don't think it's in the rule book. It is not. It might be explained there, but you really do need that chart. That's not too big a deal. You figure out where it is when you need it. The setup sheet is necessary. I mean, it's basically the scenario chart for the two scenarios that the game provides and tells you where you put things. We'll get to the rules in a moment. The counters, one of the questions is how do you put everything away? What I found as useful was I put the two coin sets in their own little baggies, and I put the population tiles in their own baggie. All of these are things that there's a fair number of counters that you want separated, perhaps. I have a lot of little baggies right now. I don't always. And, basically you dump the coin set into a cup, and one of the two coin sets, and you're using that from the beginning. The second coin set gets dumped in at a later era, and the population set is constantly in a cup and is never anywhere else. Everything else, really, you kind of have to sort it onto that counter tray or somehow otherwise sort it before you start playing. And I mean, yes, you could bag all kinds of different things, but I just didn't feel like there were enough counters of anything else to warrant their own bag. You could make arguments for some of these things, like, all the stuff that's pre-programmed on the map could go into a bag. But my feeling is there aren't that many counters. By the way, I love these laser cut counters like this. They smell so good. Kind of like burnt stuff. No charcoal on them or anything like the VPG ones used to come with a rag so you could clean them off. Somebody does that for you, I'm sure, before they package the box. I kind of liked that, but it could damage some of the other materials if it's not bad. So, the rule book itself, oh crap. It's not good. It's not good. Some of that, I don't know if there's a way around it. It is a solitaire game with a very, very procedural set of rules of when this, do this. It doesn't feel as if those when this, do thises are as accessible as they could possibly have been. There are some places where, maybe you're following, you follow a sequence of play element through maybe two rules lookups to get what you want. But that happens. In some cases, maybe a rules reference was dropped. You can pencil that in if you need it. Much more painful to me is simply the fact that it's a procedural rulebook. Those are difficult mainly because you can't kind of get into your head the grasp of, well, what am I doing why? You might forget some things and come later in the procedure and see, wow, I really screwed up. You might also just forget some things, which I did. I played this incorrectly twice, so I'm not going to be able to give you a, great analysis of the game off of two incorrectly played games of it. But what I can tell you is that some of the formatting choices in this rulebook set me absolutely fucking crazy. Way too much color. Pictures of counters which you think would bring you to the place where you want the counter to be, where you want the information on that counter, and it's maybe right above, or not where you expect it at all. All this color, all the pictures and everything make it difficult for me. I tend to remember case-driven rulebooks pretty well as to where I'm going to find X in it if there aren't a lot of other visual clues. But all these visual cues end up confusing me when there's way too much of this. When there's maybe one or two little things in the rule book as a whole, I can cope with them, and they actually do help more than just column after column of text. The use of color, the inconsistent, I think, use of color, where they're placing, historical text in one type of colored box, but other historical text in other types of colored boxes. So, for example, this tan stuff is historical text, this red is historical text, blue is examples. I mean, there's just so many different cases of different coloration and everything. I would say whatever doesn't have to do with the game, put in one kind of text. Preferably a grayscale rather than, flashing all kind of colors at me. They used, I don't know what they use with the red. Is it first use of a term? Oh wow, and now we have this kind of lavender text here. There's just way too much use of color in this rule book as a whole. Beyond that, though, the very type of game it is makes it really hard, I think, to present a rule book that gives you a sort of a strategic overview, because it really is designed to get you to be able to do your play a little thing at a time. And if you're not me, if you want to play a game maybe 4 or 5 times, I wish I could. I used to be able to. Not right in a row, though. Like, the fact that I played this, failed, played it again, and pushed through a second mistake actually shows a little bit more emphasis than I would normally do. What is cool, though, is the game itself. I'm not usually a big fan of solo games. I feel like for the first half of this game, before I had a meltdown essentially over, I don't know why. The second time I screwed up really fucked me over hard. But basically, the overhead of the rules, about halfway through when the Arabs come in, became just too much. I reached a breaking point there. And, maybe I'm a little more fragile than usual, but I have trouble often enough. I don't know if that's the case. Some people obviously don't have problems with this kind of rule. They absorb everything perfectly fine or whatever. Or they play it 3 or 4 times before they settle down and say, I'm going to play it for real now. But basically, I had to... I was finding myself looking up the same things again and again now. That's the thing, because there's some discontinuity in terms of how the game handles certain things, like attacks. It depends on who you're attacking and which direction it's in and stuff like that. So there's a lot of little piecemeal rules that you have to either have all in mind, or you're constantly doing rules lookups. And I find I can hold a small stack of such things in my head, but this game required, especially once I hit the rise of Islam, me to hold too many of those little things in my head to manage anymore. And then as I got towards the very end, I started getting a little more comfortable with sort of the paradigm shift that happens about halfway through, where a significant amount more complexity adds in, and maybe wasn't as bothered anymore. But what it does do very, very well within that is I loved the story that it was providing me with. This is a subject I'm terribly interested in. You might not think so from who I am and whatever, but I'm very interested in the spread of religions and how that happens, and seeing there's a great deal of history on the spread of Christianity and on the fairly early years of it. And you can thank Paul and a few others for that. And this game really seems to do a great job of providing that without binding you to that history. So you could you can seriously go astray from what historically happened. And there's major things that can happen, like paths are not linked to their historical religion that that path would have followed. So that's really the big plus to it for me. And overall, I would say that I'm pleased with it. It's just at that halfway point, I had a burden that, I think next time I pick it up, I'm going to have that same ramp up thing. I'm not going to play this game again for 5 years. That's probably a massive understatement for the amount of time, but just given the piles that I have. But if I met someone who was really interested in the subject matter and was willing to play a solo game 2-player, I would gladly sit with them and play this with them, and might be able to actually help them with the rules lookups and stuff, and let them make more of the decision making as I gave kind of like consequences or thoughts that I have based on my whatever knowledge I have of the rules. I really like doing solo games that way, with someone I'm really, really close with. But in this particular case, I can't get back to games that I love far more than this, that have been long in my repertoire, that I've just been getting too many. The story is the big thing, though. Watching that story unfold. It is also, I think, a challenging solo game. Now, it's hard for me to say that, because the first time I played it, I cheated against myself, and boy was it hard! The second time, I ended up cheating in favor of myself, and it was very easy, and I'm not sure how much of a benefit I got off of that cheating itself, because that cheating basically just stretched out the period before Islam comes. Islam can really kick you in the ass, and it can kind of do it no matter what. And so I'm kind of like, well, I'm not sure that more, another 100 years or whatever of preparation really got me into that strong a position compared to where I was before that 100 years. I certainly had turns where I'm like, there are things I can do, but they don't feel as vital as what it used to, what it did early in the game, where I felt like I was really rushing to try to get the Saxons converted, to try to get, my paths carved out. One thing that in neither game, now my cheating didn't take place in this favor, that was very hard to do, was to avoid throwing paths into schism. By basically, you automatically get a heresy in locations where you haven't found, I don't know if it's the Pope for the area or the major, I think it's the major city, which is where the Pope for the area will show up. If you haven't gotten there, it can be problematic. And not all of them are close. Carthage is hard to get to. Constantinople is kind of far, but others are clustered close to Jerusalem, so you can reach them more. And I would make more of an effort to make sure that I reach those locations. You don't have that much control over that necessarily, though. Some of it's based on how far any given apostle moves you for free. You can push them a little further with money, or you can push bishops that show up in their place with money. The relics choice, when your apostles die, which they will, they're mortal, but they may die either through being martyred, which is pretty damn likely. Otherwise, you'll be doing quite well on their path, or through just through old age. Then they turn into relics, which are excess money that you have. There's a really hard choice there where you have the money and it's worth, from one period in the game it starts being worth $1 each, and then from the later period, then there's a much, much later period in the game where it's worth twice as much. So if you're doing really well, you can kind of keep them in the bank, especially James, who's in Jerusalem, and will always be available for you to turn in. But some of the others might be in territory that you control and that you can count on being able to cash in. But you have to wait until after Islam comes, and that is difficult. I couldn't keep the money. You have these different expensive you have certain expensive things that you have to build over the course of the game. The Bibles are kind of expensive to put on the board. The infrastructure, your monasteries, universities, and hospitals. Well, you can get hospitals for free, and they're really awesome, but you may not want them where they're showing up for free. Or when they're showing up for free. You may need the other advantage that you can take from an epidemic, which is a conversion. It's financially not a good deal for you, and you're always having to make these balancing choices. You have a limited amount of resources and a lot you want to do in the game. So that's another positive. I found that cutting the game into pieces mentally made it more by path, made it easier to approach. And I talk about that in my wrap. But yeah, overall, just for the story, if you're interested in the subject matter, I would say go for it. It's a little pricey, not compared to, all other, any other box game, but for the component set, you get whatever in it. It feels like you're paying a little much, but in the end, you're kind of paying more for the game than you are for all the contents that come with it. The contents, you can kind of argue it away, if you're me at least. But yeah, I mean, when I pick up, I don't know, things of this size and component level, I think often are coming in around 30 to 35, and this is running for 50, which, if you're looking at like GMT or something, sure, it's made in China, but you're getting, a whole bunch of stuff. Probably lots of little wooden toys for your dog to choke on or whatever as well. But yeah. Anyway, I had my fun with it, and I think it's a worthwhile way to explore the subject matter. Especially if you like solo games, but even me as someone who's not a big fan of most solo games, I found myself drawn into it until that rules overhead and the lookups became too much. And then I felt like I was playing a game more than watching the story unfold. I felt like I was trying to optimize too much in the latter half of the game, trying to win. Once I start trying to win too much, I'm a little less into it. But I had a lot of fun in the first half. Anyway, cheers.